In today's video, we are going to take a deep dive into the Redux. So this is gonna be an introductory video of how to use Redux. Okay, so I am just taking an example of the counter application to denote the Redux, and I have used a simple JavaScript file. So this is not a part of any React application. So for this, we need to first import the Redux. Alright, but since this is a JavaScript file, this is not in a React application, so therefore I have to use the normal note command for using Redux, which is const Redux is equal to require, and inside this I have to use Redux. Okay. Now the Redux is imported. Now what is Redux? The Redux is actually like a global store, which is actually like a global layer which revolves around your application, where you actually keep all your global state or properties which you want to access from any level of your application. Alright, so in order to use Redux, we have to keep 4 points in our mind, or rather the 4 steps which involves in using the Redux. What are the 4 steps? The first step is to create the Redux store. The second step is to use or create the reducer. The third step is dispatch action, and the fourth step is subscription. So these 4 points are the key features of the Redux, which you should always keep in your mind. Okay, so in order to actually show you how the Redux works, I am taking an example of a counter application which I'm gonna build today, and as I build, I am gonna tell you at each and every step how you should actually write these 4 steps or follow these 4 steps to create your store, a Redux store. Okay, so after you have imported the Redux from the Redux library, the next thing which you have to do is to create the store. Okay, so let me import the create store function which is available on the Redux. Const create store is equals to redux dot create store. So this create store actually contains the redux.create store, which is actually a function for creating the store. Okay, so how we're gonna use it? Under this command where I have written create store, we will actually now create the store. Okay, now our store, what is the store? Store actually contains the states. Okay, default states which you want to share at different levels of your application. So how to create the store? We have to write const store is equals to create store. We have just imported from the Redux. Now this create store is actually a function which takes in a parameter. Now what parameter does it take? This parameter is actually the reducer. So remember guys, I have written here the reducer. This is not actually the second step. This is actually the first step, which must come before creating the store, because your create store function gonna require this reducer in the parameter to be actually creating the store. Okay, so now what is reducer? The reducer is actually a function. It's a pure function which takes 2 parameters. So let's first create the reducer. Const root reducer is equals to a function. I'm taking here an arrow function. You can take a normal JavaScript function, that's your choice. And one more thing is that I have used the name root reducer. This is actually the variable name I have given to the function. You can use anything you like, but generally this is the convention. Okay, now this reducer function takes in two arguments. Okay, always remember this, guys. This takes two arguments. The first argument that it takes is the state, and the second argument it takes is the action. Okay, now what is the state? The state is actually the default state, or you can say the initial state or default state, which actually contains your default values of the states, or default values, you know, of the states which you want to share among your at different levels of your application. Okay, what is the action? The action is actually, you can relate it to performing some action. Okay, I will actually, as I go on, this two will actually be more clearer to you. Okay, so for now you just keep in mind that you need to create the reducer, which is actually a pure function which takes in two arguments. Number one is the state and number two is the action. Now this, inside this we can actually return the state, and write down here where we have created the store. Remember guys, I told you that createStore function takes in a parameter, and that parameter is actually the reducer. And what is our reducer? Our reducer is the root reducer. So we need to pass this root reducer right at inside this as a parameter inside the createStore. Now if we console.log and see what is inside that store, so we can see that by using store.getState. The getState is a function which actually gives the state inside your store. Okay, see now, if I save it, then I get here undefined. Okay, that's pretty obvious because our state actually doesn't contain anything. All right, doesn't contain anything, so that's why we get here undefined. I can prove you. If I give the state a default value of, let's say, my name is Joyesh. If I give this as a default name, you can now pretty much see that I am getting Joyesh down here. Okay, this is because the state previously giving me undefined because it was not containing any values, but now I have since given my name inside this state as a default value, it is returning me the default value. Okay, now here there is a concept of initial state. Okay, let me show you here. You have to create something called initial state. Now what is this initial state? Initial state is generally the default state you want to share at different levels of your application. Okay, generally this initial state is always going to be an object. Why? Because remember, if you are building an application, suppose I am building a movie application. Now think about, guys, what can be the default or global values which you will be requiring at all levels of your application. Generally it's gonna be the user details which you will be accessing from the database, like the user name, the user email, which you can use at different levels of your application. And it can be also something like the movie details which you can use at different levels of your application. Maybe you can build a watch cart, watch list, a watched list, or you can do something like a buy or rent feature. in your movie application. So you will be requiring that movie details, and also you will be requiring the user details for authentication purpose and also for creating the database. So in general context I am speaking, in this initial state you are always going to be using more than one fields. So that is why in most of the time it's going to be an object, but you can also use string, boolean values or any integer values, that's your choice, but generally it's going to be an object. Okay, so in this initial state let me create three fields, three key value pairs. Name, this name gonna be my name, Joyesh Devnath. Then let's take another key as age, so age is 21, and let's take another key as is programmer. Let's take this a boolean value of true. Okay, so you can see here I have created an initial state which takes in three key value pairs. Generally this is an object. Now what I want to do is that instead of giving the state as default value of my name, I want to take the initial state as the default state. Okay, so if I use this, then you will observe that I am getting the state, the get state gives me this state, name Joyce Devnath, age is 21, and is programmer true. Okay, so this is generally the convention. You create an initial state, you declare the reducer, you take in state an action inside the reducer, you give a default value of the state as the initial state, which actually takes in the initial states you provide, and inside this reducer you gonna perform some actions to change the state, to change the default value of your state. All right, since we are building a counter application, our initial state will not contain these details, that is name Joyce Devnath is 21 or is programmer. This will simply contain a key value pair as counter, and I want to use a default value of 0. Okay, so by default my counter is going to be containing 0. All right, now if I run this, then you can see here I am getting counter equals to 0 as my state. Okay, now let's come to the next point of dispatching an action. Now what is dispatching an action? Dispatching an action is basically you are telling the reducer what action you need to perform on the state. Okay, so that's called dispatching or dispatcher. So the dispatch is actually a function which is applicable on the store. So you have to write here store dot dispatch. So the dispatch is a function which is applicable on the store. Now this takes in a parameter. Okay, now what's this parameter? This parameter is always going to be an object. Okay, now this object contains one thing compulsory, which is the type. Okay, the type. Now what is the type? This type is actually the main feature or the main key which actually tells the reducer what action you need to perform on your default state. Okay, what changes you need to perform, this is actually conveyed by this type. So generally the convention is that you need to give the type in capital letters. So I will use this convention. So what I'll give this type, I'll say include or increment count. I'll say increment count. So this is the type. So I'm telling my reducer to increment the count. Okay, now if I go to my state, Alright, if I go to my state, then you can see here I am using the return state, but this time I'll not return the state. This time I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna change my state, which is actually containing the counter as 0, and I'm gonna change my counter value from 0 to incremented by 1, that is 1. Okay, how do I need to perform this? How can I perform this? So remember this, we use a dispatch. Inside this we have a type, and the type is increment count. Now this type is actually accessed by this thing, action. Okay, so you have to give here a if else condition. If my action dot type is equals to increment count, if my action is equals to increment count, then I want to change the state. I want to return a new state. So it's gonna be an object. I want to return a new state which is containing all the previous state. So you need to give a spread operator here, because if you don't give a spread operator, it's going to change the initial values, and you don't want that. You want your state to be remain taking the previous value and accessing the new value. All right, so you have to use a spread operator to use the previous things, and then you need to write here counter is equals to state dot counter plus 1. Now this is going to change your state. Okay, this thing is going to change your state if I use here, and let me show you that. If I use console.log store dot get state. Okay, get state is a function. If I use store dot get state, you can see here guys, the counter value got incremented by 1. I'm getting the counter as 1. Okay, so it's not like that you can use only one dispatch, you can use multiple dispatch. For example, I want to increment the counter by let's say 100. So in order to do that, I use another store.dispatch right here, store.dispatch. This will take in an object as a parameter which takes a type. Okay, now this type contains add underscore count as the type, and you can also use any property you like inside the dispatch. You can use anything, but the main the compulsory key is that you always need to use the type, and you have to mention the type. Apart from type, you can take in any other key value pairs. For example, I'm taking here a key value pair as val, and I'm taking the val as 100. So this val actually tells that increment my count by 100. Okay, I'll use this val to increment my counter by 100. How can I do that? By simply going here, I have written here the if statement, and down the if statement I will use else if my action dot type triple equals to add count, then I need to return the new state return the new state, which is actually gonna be the previous state, comma, the new state will be updated inside the counter as state dot counter plus, this time I will use the val property. Okay, the val property. And remember this, the whatever inside this dispatch is always accessed by this action property. So action dot type is equals to @count. Then I will change my counter value from state dot count plus action dot val. So if I execute this, then you see here my counter became 101. Okay, so it first became 1 for this increment count, and after that it added this @count. Okay, now one more thing I need to share with you. It is the convention of not to use if else inside this reducer, because it becomes a little messy. What you can do is that you can replace this if else by using switch case. Okay, so let me replace this by using switch case. So if I replace this, I have to write here switch, and what is the parameter I have to take action dot type, because I am actually my switch case depends on the action dot type. So action dot type, inside this I have to replace this if by using case action dot type equals to increment count, then something, that something is returning the state and incremented by 1. Else if, I'll not use here else if, I'll use case 2. So case @count, if @count, then I'll do something, that something is returning the state incremented by 100. Okay, and since I'm using a switch case, I have to use a default case. So what is the default? If the default is that if your type doesn't matches with the increment count or @count, you have to use the default as return the state. Just return the default state, whatever you have. So return RUTURN, return state. So you just need to return the default state inside. Okay, one thing, I think I have made a mistake here somewhere. Okay, return state, line number 42. Okay, line number 42, subscription. Okay, I have made mistake. Okay, return state, case @count, case include. All right, I think I have not. Okay, all right. So the curly bracket was missing here. Now I have fixed it. Okay, now you can see here is that my counter actually became 101, which is actually fine. Like this we can also use for decrease count. So I have to use store dot dispatch. Inside this I'll take the type as decrease. Let me take simple decrease. Now this decrease will decrease the count by 1. So I'll go inside my reducer, I'll use another case, the case of decrease, and if my case is decrease, I will return the state, return the new state, which is the previous state. So I will use the spread operator, comma, the new state, which is the counter, and inside this counter I will use state dot counter minus 1. So my decrease is just doing minus by 1. Okay, all right, and I'll use one more store.dispatch, dispatch, and I'll use object which takes the type. The type gonna be decrease dec val and this will actually take another parameter as val, which is actually I will take this val as 50. So this is actually gonna decrease the counter by 50. So I'll use here case dec underscore val, and if this case matches, then I'll return my state, a new state. And what is my new state? My new state will be whatever the previous state. So spread operator, comma, the new value of counter gonna be replaced by state dot counter minus action dot val. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. So this was the concept. Now remember, we have also talked about one more concept, and that concept was subscription. All right. Subscription. Now what is subscription? Subscription is actually a function, subscribe function, which runs every time you change your state inside the reducer. All right. Subscription, I'm again telling you, subscribe is actually the thing which is going to trigger every time you made any changes to your state inside your reducer. All right. So this subscribe method will actually be used just after creating the store and before using the dispatch action. Okay, so let me write here subscribe. Okay, so you can think it as a action, as a on-click listener. You can think this as a on-click listener. Every time you click, an event get fired. So it's something like that. Okay, every time your state get changed inside the reducer, your initial state get changed, this subscribe method is going to fire that moment of time. Okay, so remember that we have used 4 different dispatch. So we are actually changing the state 4 times.